Dom, do you still watch the news?
Jenna,
That
this is a
laughs at
real this
everything.
what well, I guess you know what news are you talking about, I guess. Are you talking about news from like dinner time news, like the old days of like ABC, the 6 o'clock news? Are you talking
Oh,
about cable
yeah.
news? Are you talking about, do I watch news online? Do I get it? Like, what do you mean?
Well, any of them. I mean, do you just
Oh,
watch news on TV? Like, no, I mean,
I
do you turn on
I
the
get
TV for the news?
No, I don't. I don't turn this here on. I do not.
Yeah.
I don't. You know why? I honestly, when I especially broadcast news, I find it exhausting. It's always something breaking. Everything always feels so heavy, or it's super light. It depends. But to me, it's like either morning shows or like super light and whatever. And then evening news is so heavy. It's like breaking, breaking, breaking. I'm just exhausted from it.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Well, listen, I want to give your mind a break, so let's start the show. Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Dom. You know what's funny? Not long ago, we were both breaking news. Now we're
Breaking unemployment records.
exactly just like thousands of other journalists who've been laid off from newsrooms across the country.
Yeah, and after the shock wore off, we kept asking ourselves, what the hell do we do now?
And over many, many cups of coffee,
And maybe a few drinks.
we realized we had a unique opportunity here. Why not pull back the curtain on what's really happening in American media?
Right? I mean, we've spent years in this industry seeing how stories get made or don't, and now we can actually talk about it.
And trust me, there's a lot to talk about. From local news disappearing to social media reshaping journalism, we'll break it all down.
And look, we're not here to lecture anybody. We just want to help make sense of the information that we're getting and maybe have some much needed fun along the way.
So whether you're glued to the news, just trying to figure out what's real in your feed, or curious about the future of media, come hang with us.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking, a podcast where two journalists
Are taking a critical look at American media.
No more breaking news. No more. I rebuke it. I rebuke it. No more breaking news. Sorry. Aaron, much love to you, man, but no more. Stop breaking it. Like, no. No. I'm gonna go find a piece of land in the Caribbean and on a mountainside and just kind of like stay there and hide and never come back into this world because I rebuke any more breaking news. The only thing breaking will be my bank after I move to the Caribbean and get out of this joint.
Yeah, that was that was a video that I came across. I think the creator's name is like Broadmop or something. His real name, I think, is Derek Edwards.
Okay.
But it made me think of you, Dom, because I feel like that's everybody at this point. Just you gotta stop, man. My nervous system can't take it.
It is. I mean, do you feel that way, Jenna? Do you feel overwhelmed by news?
It's weird because, first of all, the whole concept of breaking news to me has
Hmm.
just become the boy who cried wolf. Like, I just ignore it at this point. Like, unless I see a news story starting that's actually a news story breaking. But usually it should be like, update to the story. I understand that's not going to grab your attention the
No,
same
it's
way,
not. It's not.
but that's what really breaking news actually is. It's just like updates or it's a continuation, whatever. It's too much.
It's just new information. And I know it's when I worked in
Sometimes, or
cable.
it's new
Oh,
information to
new.
whoever tuned in that moment.
Yes. We used to say it's new to me.
There you go. It's new to me,
we
so it's breaking news.
we used to do that. It was like anytime there was any kernel of news that was different, you felt the need to put breaking news on it because it did give a sense to the audience of immediacy. It's like this is happening now. You must watch this now. It's new information that you can't miss. But that kind of anxiety, I don't think works anymore. And I don't think it ever worked, but I do think like it's lost its actual power or what it means. And
That
also I
part.
think it's also just exhausting for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
Even yeah, even for people like whether you're an influencer online, I get it. You want to make, you're maybe that's part of your brand. It's part of what you do. It's you feel it's what grabs your audience attention, but I do think it gets to be a little bit just exhausting.
I feel like this might be the decade that that term dies because people are really sick of it. Do not say breaking news to me unless, like just stop. So yeah, but I don't know. I just don't feel like that really works anymore. And it's one of the things that I think I've watched get overused, and
Mhm.
then people like myself included, as a journalist, just dismiss and sort of turn away from, which seems to be the undoing of broadcast media.
Well, because it goes back to this whole feeling of, well, you're watching something or you're listening to something, and if it doesn't feel truthful, then your audience starts questioning everything about it. If
That
people
could be
start,
the first
right?
crack in the trust wall.
Well, because people start to catch on and the audience catches on. You have a trust with them. And again, I'm talking about, this is in the early 2000s when I was doing this. And even back then we used to joke about it. All broadcasts and cable news, they all did that because that's sort of what was cable news had to do that in a way. Well, had to. That's what they chose to do in that way because of the fact that it gave a purpose for the 24-hour news cycle. It's like you've got to watch because there's something breaking every second of the day.
Oh my
But it
God.
does turn out to be like a business, and the audience after a while now is just like, oh yeah, let me guess, breaking news.
No, it's funny that you said it that way because I was just like, oh my God, then that's even more appropriate that we use like Broadmop's audio
Yes.
because apparently he does advocacy for Jamaica. And I'm just like, oh, it's like Bob said, you can fool some people sometime, but you can't fool all the people all the time.
That's right.
It came full
Sooner,
circle.
sooner or later it catches up.
Well,
It
yeah,
really
but
does.
I mean, like, is the news still the news if the news is just about ratings?
Ooh.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I mean, I mean, oh, that's a tough one. I mean, it's still, I mean, if it's fact based, it is. You're right. I mean, it is. If it's fact based, I mean,
But if
listen,
you
the
tell
news.
a fact-based story and no one tunes in to watch it, then your advertisers don't, they're going to pull out and now the whole
Right.
thing collapses.
Well, that's where it
This is
becomes
a
how we.
wonderful business model we built, by
uh,
the way.
But it's true.
What
It's
the hell
like,
are we doing?
well, I mean, if you look at some of them, it's like we've discussed this before too, Jenna, about like news organizations that sort of have a certain perspective that is, you know what I mean? Whether it's a conservative, whether it's a liberal and or moderate or whatever it is, they have an audience that they feed. And sometimes with that, does it change the fact that that news, whether or not if it's based on facts, then it should all be the same. But sometimes it doesn't come across that way.
No, it certainly does not come across that way. And of course, I mean, listen, like the race for ratings, which I guess it's weird because, of course, when you're in it, you don't think of it that way. But in hindsight, you're like, oh, I don't know if that's healthy for like the body politic or
Well,
anybody.
it's not healthy for journalism,
No.
maybe. You know what I mean? Because now you've made it solely about that. I mean, we were talking before about always wanting to still make a living. Like journalists
Yeah.
and people who work in the industry do have to make a living, and there's no wrong in wanting to make a good living, right? I think the thing is when that living maybe changes how you tell like if you manipulate the facts, if you do it to appease a certain audience, that's where I think when people change their truth, that's a problem.
And the crack gets deeper. Well, listen, I mean, I think that that's something that, a lot of people definitely feel with especially cable news when they watch or if they used to watch. Um, we've talked about journalist burnout, but there's also audience burnout and people getting sick of the bias and, not really sure if they can trust if this is, fair and balanced news that they're getting. But at the same time, people having to deliver for audience demand. I mean, all of those are challenges. It's a
Or
weird
when,
balancing
yeah,
act.
yeah. Or when you're an organization that, let's say now we see billionaires buying, of course, it's been going on for a while. It's not new, but or billionaires who buy news organizations
Is it that
to
they're
kind of
buying or now they're just meddling in?
probably, yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
I was gonna
good
be like, because
question.
you're right. Like they've always bought, but I'm just like, no, these people have their fingers all into everything now. Like the firewall that used to be between ownership and editorial control, that ish is just melted away.
It has, and it changes sometimes what people are going to hear and read and what points of view they're going to be exposed to. And before I feel like, listen, there are some who go out there and that change if your audience isn't aware, you can fall into like, oh, I didn't think about that, or oh wow, that's really like, and my thing is, yeah, but are you being manipulated? And sometimes I do feel like we are.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's exactly the kind of questions that we had that made us want to get into this conversation with our next guest. So let's get to the interview.
Who gets to decide what journalists can say and what they can't? Lately, that question feels harder to answer.
Yeah, it really does. And even with all of the layoffs and the cutbacks and the power structure, that hasn't really changed. And a handful of companies still decide which stories actually get told. One of them is CBS, which is now owned by David Ellison's Skydance. And then they just hired Barry Weiss, who was the writer behind the Free Press and is now editor in chief of CBS. And this has all become a very tangled web.
Barry says she wants journalism that, in her words, holds both political parties in equal scrutiny. Some people see that as balance, others as a red flag, especially after CBS settled with President Trump over his lawsuit with 60 Minutes, in which he agreed, and in which they agreed to release full transcripts of future candidate interviews.
Exactly. That seems to be a very big sticking point for a lot of people. But it all points to a much bigger issue. And that, of course, is who's actually steering the news coverage and how much of that control is shaping what it is that the public actually gets to learn, see, and hear. So, our guest today, Jennifer Schulze, is a journalist and media critic whose Substack, Indistinct Chatter, takes a sharp look at the state of the media and how it's changing. So, Jennifer, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, first off, I just want to start with one of the things that people might not necessarily know when it comes to working in journalism is that there can be, depending on which media shop you're working with, a culture of fear within the newsroom. Can you sort of talk about how there are things, but there also aren't things that a lot of journalists feel as though they can talk about?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I think it's changed dramatically since Donald Trump came on the scene. I think that traditional newsrooms have traditionally been a place where you could have a robust discussion about the news of the day, your community, and things like that. I don't think that is true so much anymore. I think there is a great deal of fear in many of the more traditional newscasts, particularly the national ones. I think, for example, we see now CBS, there are reports that in the morning meeting, the journalists that are on, I think it's a call, not an actual in-person meeting anymore, are suddenly echoing some of the political points that the new boss has, which they didn't used to do. And that's just another way of, I may not believe this, but I know this is the lane you want us to go down, so I'm going to be a part of that. But here's the good news. There's a lot of really great media out there. It just doesn't happen to be necessarily owned by the big companies anymore, right? Like Mother Jones, ProPublica, the New Republic. Those journalists, I'm confident, are having fact-based, robust conversations about things in and out of their newsrooms. And you see it in their daily coverage.
Cool, cool. Well, I mean, listen, keeping your job as a journalist has suddenly become a different kind of very real priority.
Jennifer, I'm curious, like when we talk about when people, if you're a journalist or you're working at a company now, you're just kind of trying to go along with your boss, what the boss says. What's the concern of what that means in terms of the news that people are actually getting? I mean, is there a difference in terms of can you really trust it as much if people are now saying that, I'm trying to go along with whatever the company, this is the new word. This is what I'm trying to go along with what my boss, what they want to hear. Does that change what Should people feel secure in the news that they're getting from those same organizations?
Well, yes and no. I mean, again, since Trump came on the scene, we've seen an interesting pulling back, if you will, of, actual facts, right? It took the New York Times 3 years, I think the reporting is, to use the word liar for Donald Trump,
That was a huge
while
debate.
Hmm.
right? While the Washington Post was aggressively, actively documenting all of the lies he told on a daily basis. And at the end of his first term, published this gigantic thing about how many lies he told in 4 years and liberally used the word lie. The Washington Post isn't really doing that anymore because they have, a different point of view these days. Um, you know what? I think the news is mostly trustworthy. What I worry about, it's kind of like the stuff on the edges, the shading, the wording, like you look at the headlines in the New York Times. Could they be more direct? Yes, they could. Are they intentionally softening them to be less combative towards Trump? I think they are. Does that mean the story itself is wrong or has mistakes? It may be framed in a way that is probably a little more gentle towards Trump, and a lot of times it is. I think, though, the bulk of the reporting is typically very reliable. And so that's an interesting juggling act that we as consumers have to think about. We're mad at that headline. Is the story accurate? How do you reconcile all that? And what does it mean over time? Are they slowly pulling back on critical coverage of Trump? I would argue yes, and the pulling back is continuing. In fact, I'm not so sure it's slow anymore.
Well,
I
it's
still get.
interesting. Oh, sorry,
Okay,
Tom.
sorry.
What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say what you're saying there. It still concerns me that if there's this sense of trying to be cautious, like it's like the article itself is, yes, that's factual, but the fact that anybody is pulling back still really concerns me. That it's like, why can't you just say what you mean to say? Why do you have to hold back? Because that in and of
You do
itself
get that
feels
sense from
right.
some, especially I would say in the broadcast space, where it's almost as if there's something the journalist wants to say and they keep walking up to the line of saying it. And so you as an audience member are just like, it's almost like Rocky Horror Picture Show. Just say it. And it's
Yeah,
bizarre.
but these I've talked about this a lot through the years, especially as it relates to broadcasting. That's mostly my background is in broadcasting.
Hmm.
And people are desperate to hold on to their jobs.
Mhm.
And they see that their owners are writing checks to Donald Trump to help pay for his ballroom, or they're going to meetings with him, or they're writing him big checks to settle a lawsuit that really they shouldn't have written that check for that. And so, if you're some 28-year-old Capitol Hill reporter, are you really going to stand in front of the camera and say something, really direct, or are you going to be a little bit more hesitant because I need this job. And if I become the story, and also if the mob comes after me, which happens frequently, right?
Hmm.
You want to be
Mhm.
that 28-year-old and MAGA's coming after you and doxing you and threatening your life. I mean, I think reporters are juggling a lot of things. I mean, there are some though that aren't worried about that. And I think it depends who you work for and also what your personal situation is. Some people are just a little bit more vulnerable. And so I think maybe I'm not suggesting that they're not doing their job well, but I think they're probably being really careful about how they present the information.
Well, I would add to that I think a lot of journalists are genuinely there to tell the truth and to speak truth to power. But yeah, you're right. Are doing it. This is just a very, very difficult balancing act. But so one of my other questions then becomes, from your perspective, what do you think that is doing to the public trust? Because one of the things that seems to be consistent in all of this is that the public seems to have completely shrugged its shoulders and insisted that they don't trust most of us, no matter what we do.
So I blame Donald Trump for that in
Mm,
the last 10 years. I mean, let's remember, from the moment he came down that escalator, he's been talking about fake news and targeting individual reporters and targeting news organizations. It's become a mantra on his side of the aisle now for 10 years that you cannot trust the media. They say it every day. They say it all of them say it. And so when you're then doing the polling, well, half the people that are people who voted for him and supported him, they're going to be like, yeah, he's right about that. But is it really true? I mean, I think people still trust their local news, and the polling still shows that, right? So I, I don't buy the people don't trust the media. I think it's a political question and not a factual question about the actual work being done by the media. That doesn't mean that the media hasn't screwed up and the media doesn't have a lot of work to do. And I think I've long argued that the media has failed. Mainstream media, fact-based journalism should have done a better job of showing their work and explaining how they do what they do, so that when these attacks first started coming in, people were like, no, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense, because I know that the person who did this story wrote in the second paragraph that they interviewed 15 people and they looked at this video and they had this expert do this and do that, do this. You're seeing more of that in some reporting now. We should have been doing that all along, because we left ourselves vulnerable to these attacks.
Jennifer, there's so much trust. You always hear that trust that the public has in local media. But it's interesting because sometimes you feel like at least I do that. It feels like local media sometimes is the one that struggles the most in terms of financials, in terms of like, it always feels like that's the one that, you don't have large staffs. Local media, oftentimes you're scrappy, but it's because there's not always the money that's there as much as when you have, and I think what we're seeing now too is like you see larger media companies that have been going through this over the past few years of where sort of seem to like reign for so long, but now the money isn't, now they're sort of struggling themselves. But how does that balance then of, how do we sort of work it out where, well, I should say, why is it that local media seems to have the trust, but maybe doesn't always have the finances or doesn't always have the behind it that the bigger companies do?
Well, the whole industry is suffering because the advertising revenue went away for everybody. The entire business model has been destroyed by the internet, right? Television and newspapers and radio were supported by advertising. That advertising flew over to the internet, and then on the internet, news organizations started giving away their content for free, and then influencers happened and TikTok and all of that, and the entire business model was blown up. So the financial stuff, I don't think is directly related to the work that's being done by the local media. But you're right, newsrooms have shrunk. Thousands of journalists every year lose their jobs. The thing about local news, though, and why people trust it, those people live in those communities. They know the people watching the news or reading the news or going to the website, they know these reporters or they know of these reporters, and they're part of a community. And when you're part of a community, it's really important, and I think a lot of reporters do this, to tell the truth and do a really good job reporting about your neighbors. And I think that's why local news is so much more trusted. There's a connection as opposed to somebody from New York parachuting into Chicago to report on what ICE and CBP are doing here, as opposed to the local reporters, right? We feel connected. We know those people. We see their work every day. They're accountable to us. That's part of it. That is just part of the community. And I think that helps local media. But yeah, everybody's struggling financially. There's no question about that.
Yeah, that becomes more and more painfully obvious with every new round of layoff headlines. I also do want to kind of go back, though, to when we were talking about corporate influence on stories. And you had mentioned the New York Times. And of course, I feel like I have to mention, it seems like in the age of clicks and attention, that a lot more newspapers are pushing their op-eds, which, again, I'm not sure if everyone in the public is clearly differentiating reporting or analysis of a story with op-eds, which is really just somebody's opinion. So the latest one that seems to have gotten everybody's attention is, did women ruin the workplace?
Oh my God.
And but yeah, but at the same time, like, that's rage bait. And so is the fact that we're seeing some legacy institutions engage in something that's really just there to get you riled up and talking about it. Because I guess now all press is good press for everybody. Like, how much is that doing damage to the brand?
Yes, it is. But here's the interesting thing, and I think this is what's at play with CBS. CBS was bought by a company that decided it was going to go right wing, and then they installed a right wing head of CBS, as if, adding some of these clickbaity kind of stories with a right wing twist is going to suddenly change years of viewing habits for CBS, and bring over Fox viewers to CBS. That is not, no. And the New York Times, I think, has this this right wing op-ed fixation. It's almost like they're trolling the rest of us. It's like,
it feels like that.
it's like, what else could we talk about that will make all of you mad? And you know what? There probably is a bit of this in the business decision about that, because like the thing you referenced, Jenna, that op-ed about, did women ruin the workplace?
Sorry, I can't believe somebody hit publish on that.
That flew around the internet and probably got them a lot of traffic. And if you're the person sitting in that office of the New York Times, you're like, yeah, look
exactly.
At us go.
You did your job.
Look at us go.
Yeah.
And, but I think it's twofold. I think it's to get more clicks for sure, but it's also to say, look at where we are. We're right in the middle. So we're going to have some people on the left have something to say, and some people on the right have something to say. And you're right. No one knows the difference anymore between actual journalism and op-eds. And I think there's way too many op-eds. I am sick of everybody's opinion. Dial it down. Dial it down.
You heard it here, folks. Jennifer Schulze and Eminem.
Well, I just think we should have more fact-based journalism. But remember, fact-based journalism is more expensive to produce. It's really easy for somebody to sit at their computer, because I do it, and say, this is what I think about this. It doesn't cost a whole lot to produce content like that, right? That's one of the reasons we've seen so much more of it.
Going back to what you were saying about CBS, like there's this whole, when they were talking about wanting to be more balanced in terms of how they approach both political parties. Do you think they're sending out a signal there, this whole kind of like, we're now going to be fair, as if they weren't fair before, and now they are fair in terms of how they're covering stories and how they're covering politics?
Yes, they've said that. They've said we weren't doing the job we should have been doing. We're going to do it better. But their better is less fact checking, both sidesing things, and lots of opinion. And it isn't going to work for CBS. It is, it has the audience it has because of the fact-based journalism they've been doing for all these years. And it just, no one has succeeded in turning their content right-wing and pulling that audience in from other right-wing media. I just don't see how it's going to work for them. And so what will end up happening is that they'll just ruin this legacy brand that they could have built up by doing more fact-based journalism. I mean, there's great reporters at CBS. There's great reporters at 60 Minutes. They should just be building that up instead of making it all political to appease new owners and Donald Trump and all of that. They lost sight of the goal, which is, telling Americans what's going on here, and with making it fact-based, not, gee, what can we do so Donald Trump won't be mad at us? I just don't, that doesn't seem like that seems to me that's what they're doing, and I just can't get over it.
Okay, so here I have two sort of big questions here. And one of them is, this notion of both sides to issues. Now, listen, I've conducted roundtables, I've just talked about all kinds of issues with all kinds of people, and it's one thing to genuinely present two very distinctly different points of view and debate and have that conversation because I think that's necessary in part of the development of the story. But again, when it comes to ratings and clickbait and rage bait and all that other stuff, we're seeing more and more, especially in the broadcasting space, where sometimes somebody who has a different point of view is just demonstrably incorrect. Like if we were talking about, I don't know, the whether or not the earth was flat, which I never thought would be a debatable topic, but apparently it is now. And so you literally like, was Copernicus right? That would be like the headline of the show. And somebody was like, no, I think the earth is flat. And to have them to platform this individual as if this is a valid point of view. You could have somebody on who's like, yeah, I understand there are people who believe this, but maybe like, here's why they're pushing back against the understood or the accepted belief in science. But to simply just platform somebody who's going to sit there on camera and say, no, the earth is flat and that's what I think. And I think all of you are wrong and you're brainwashed sheeple and blah, 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 blah. This can't be good for anyone.
No, and more news outlets are doing it. Like look at CNN every night. They intentionally have people on who say things that are not true. Now they get fact checked, but I would argue, why would you platform a liar? I would also say that there are not two sides to a lie, and to treat anything as if it's equal in that respect is not doing journalism. It's doing something else. It's maybe making sure everybody's not mad at you or one side's not mad. I don't know why that's happening. It's cowardly and it's not correct. But you're right. If there is an issue, for example, let's take vaccines, which has been in the news for months, right?
Oh boy.
But have people on to say, there's some people who think this, and this is where that comes from.
Which actually I would love to hear.
Yeah, and here's how that happened, and here's why that's not right. But not to say, have this person, vaccines are bad, and as if it's equal with the doctors who have studied it and the medical institutions that have studied it for, a jillion years. But that keeps happening, and it's just not right. It's not right. And I think it's confusing to Americans.
And listen, Jen and I work together. We used to do roundtables all the time. And one thing that was really important whenever we booked a guest were we'd say to ourselves, is the point that they're making, does it make sense? Like, is it somebody that's reasonable that we can talk to, even if we disagree with them? And I think it's important. There's a very clear distinction between somebody who you disagree with, makes valid points, versus somebody who just is going completely coming out of the facts don't matter. They could just say whatever they want because, cable TV kind of made that the norm where you wanted to see good television. You wanted to see people yelling. You wanted to see that was the thing. Oh yeah, give me some, give me a good space where people are just screaming at one another. And it's kind of like, that's all that mattered. And then you're like, oh, well, in the end, you never really got to the end point of what was the point of this debate? And I feel like that's something that, unfortunately, it's with a lot of journalism. I mean, a lot of what we see sometimes on broadcast, that's become kind of we've been dealing with that for years. It's not about
for years. Yeah.
And that sort of shifts how people then look at journalism online too. There's a channel that called Jubilee TV where they do these. Do you know that? They do.
Yes.
But I mean, now some people think that's journalism. There's a generation that's growing. There's a because they're out there talking about topics, and I think that's the thing. It's what are we actually passing on? Jubilee TV, basically, for people who don't know, is where they'll have let's say one person who's a conservative or somebody who's a liberal, and they'll face off against 25 people from the opposite side of the aisle from them, and it gets great clicks. I mean, and that's really what it comes down to a lot of nowadays.
People where say crazy stuff.
But that's why when we're going back to New York Times, it's isn't that what it's about the clicks nowadays, and whether it's opinion pieces. I mean, but going back to this though, how does it affect the people who work there? I'm so curious because I know,
Oh,
like, for the people who work, whether it's at CBS News, I'm very curious about how that impacts the people who work there who see the change happening and kind of don't really know what to do about it.
you could
Well,
also say worked, as a lot of people just got laid off.
right. I think a
Mhm.
lot of the people who can frequently leave and go to more serious journalism outlets. That's why you see a lot of folks migrating, if you will, to ProPublica and other news outlets like that. But there aren't that many journalism jobs out there.
Hmm.
So the other thing that we all see happening is that people are going out on their own, right? And so
Mhm.
people have their own podcasts, people have their own um, video podcasts, they have their own Substacks, and that is a definitely, I think, a result of not feeling comfortable with what has happened to the place you worked at. Also, you were probably a victim of a layoff, but I mean, so that's a really interesting development, and I think it's positive. I do think all of the independent stuff, though, it's almost now like there's too much of it, and so how do you wade through that? And I do think curating information is what news organizations have done in the past. They've helped us understand what's important, right? This is what we're spending our time on because we think it's important for you to know about this. And when you have so many independent outlets out here plus social media, I think people get kind of confused about not just who to trust, but also, what should I be paying attention to, and how news organizations were great at curating. Now I think they're less good at it, and that's a problem for us. There's just too much out there, and I, for one, would appreciate a news organization that helped sort of, you know, gather up all that stuff and put it in front of me and help me understand what was going on in the world with their expertise behind it, if that makes sense.
Well, isn't that the allure of the newsletter? Is I keep seeing when people advertise them, they're always saying, "We'll condense all the news of the day for you into like this one thing that you can read." Because of course, I understand engaging with the media news cycle as it's always been, but especially now, it weighs on everybody. Um, so I get people's just like, I can't.
Right. So where do I go for my news? What do I want to know about? Who has that information and can present it to me when I want it? Which is, a big change in the news media. It's not like 5 o'clock, be there or you're going to miss it. You have to meet people where they are. But how do you do that in a way that it's credible and it's easy to digest, and it breaks through the clutter, because there's a lot of clutter out there, and some of that clutter is intentional. People and politicians want us to be confused.
Well, yes, it
Mhm.
that definitely helps. Um, I also wanted to go back to when you were mentioning what was I going to say? The viewing habits of people who, maybe you were already watching Fox News and would you actually switch over to CBS and etc. Those are viewing habits of a very certain age demographic. It just is. And at the same time, we're also seeing patterns where younger and younger demographics, like whether any of us like it or not, they are going to social media and mostly TikTok to get their news. So when it comes to meeting your audience where they are, how much of this needs to be, I guess, reimagined, and how we as journalists show up with the work that we've done, with the reporting that we've done, with the content that we create. Because people just aren't digesting information through the same outlets that they used to.
Well, I think there's a couple of issues there. And one is who controls these social media outlets and then decides on the algorithm, right? And that is, what are they putting in front of us? So
True.
you may be a mainstream news organization over here, and you decided that you're going to take your coverage and you're going to do TikTok videos and you're going to do Instagram posts and you're going to do live YouTube and you're going to do all those things. But if somebody like Elon Musk is running Twitter, which he is, or Mark Zuckerberg owns Facebook, which he does, and they decide which content they want to feature and which content they don't. That is, I don't know how you navigate that, but I do think news organizations have been very nimble lately. I think they weren't, it took a while to get there,
I
but
was gonna say slow on the uptake, but getting to the
but I
nimble.
think now you see more and more TikToks from reporters, and they're good and they're easy to understand. And I run them by, my kids are in their 20s, so I'm always like, okay, what do you guys think about this? Or what are you watching? And where are you getting your information? And they like the ones that are quick edits with graphics and explain a story. And they like that, like, something comes from a credible news organization. They feel more confident that, it's not some Yahoo making something up on the internet. So, but it's complicated. And the algorithm thing, you could do all the TikToks in the world on credible news organization. And, I mean, if the Ellisons are going to own TikTok pretty soon, and they want to keep Donald Trump happy, what are they going to do with all that news content? They're going to push it down.
That's always, but that isn't that the problem? I mean, how if that gets pushed down, you could be putting out the best content, yet nobody's paying attention to it because of the fact. And I mean, but also, what about the, for the independent journalists who are out there though, who are part of this world trying to create this new content? You're having more and more people trying to, because like I said, they've been laid off. Maybe they don't want to, maybe they don't agree with the direction their companies are going in. Maybe they're tired of working for a company where they feel like they haven't been able to use their own voice. How do they approach, what is the best way in terms of the authenticity of these new independent journalists approaching social media? What do you think about in terms of what's the best way for them to approach social media?
Well, it's interesting to me because I think a lot of the newly independent folks are doing it different ways. And I think you're kind of in. I think they're throwing stuff up against the wall and seeing what sticks, and where do they get a lot of their, where do they see success? I mean, I know of one news outlet that leans heavily into live video podcasts and streams those across every single social media platform. But they do stream it on LinkedIn, they stream it on Instagram, they stream it on Facebook. They're just trying to hit people wherever they can. And depending on the time of day or who the guest is, they have varying degrees of success. So it's, I think it's a work in progress. It is I'm guessing, an enormous amount of work, because instead of just hitting, send, you're trying to navigate this very complicated, varied news environment and non-news environment. And I think it's tough. But you do see some people breaking through. I mean, Heather Cox Richardson, the historian, is, massively successful, and she's still kind of old school. She writes a newsletter. She clicks send. It goes out on different platforms, and she's established herself as a credible source, and people have gotten into that. The longer though this goes on, I think people probably will find that it's hard to break through. And it might help if you're a marquee talent. I mean, I think Joy Ann Reid and Jim Acosta are both doing really well in their new lives. But they were big names to begin with, and that helps. I'm sure it helps, and they're good journalists, and that is important to me. But they're also really, they get the mediums. So I think that,
I should also mention they also have teams of people still working with them. Huge differences that Tom and I have learned on our own. I also, though, just to go a little bit further, though, because one of the things that is so, to me, unique about especially the social media space for journalists is that not only do people want authenticity, but they want to have a relationship with the journalist. And we've talked about this numerous times on the show, where most of us were traditionally trained as though the story was the star and we were just the conduit. But now there's this playing field where you're the star and the story comes second, and that's super awkward.
For a traditional journalist, that's a totally different way of life and a totally different business. And you're right. I suppose if you were a television news anchor, I know I worked with many here in Chicago, and they were used to the public, to interacting with the public, and the public, you walk down the street with one of them and everybody knows who they are, and they're used to that. But for everybody else, that's a whole new way of thinking. You're absolutely right, Jenny. You were not the story. Not even you were not even seen. You were not part, right? It was out there and nobody even knew that you had a role in it. But now
People glaze past your byline.
now who you are and what you represent in your credibility is exceedingly important. And I'm okay with that. I mean, but show your work, tell people who you are, be honest about what your priors are. And, if you're doing opinion, tell people you're doing opinion. But I mean, the confusion about news versus opinion, I think we could pretty much assume everybody that's doing stuff on Substack or a lot of these video podcasts, there is a big part of opinion in that, mixed in with journalism. But I think a lot of them are very clear about, okay, I researched this and we talked to this person and we got this. So as long as you show your work, I think people will really appreciate that, and it helps build your credibility.
Cool.
What about the issue of like paywalls? That seems like that was exactly. I mean, it's interesting because go ahead. No, I mean,
I just think paywalls turned out to be kind of a disaster. And I get that journalism costs money, but that's part of that whole business model problem, right? I'm not sure paywalls were the answer. And I think the free media that got out there way ahead of free media on the right wing got ahead of that pretty fast. And they became easily accessible and free and started setting the narrative. And over here, you've got the New York Times, the Atlantic, different places where you'd come up against a paywall, so you could never read the story. That's not an even playing field. And the consumer has said no to paywalls. They've been absolutely adamant about it. But what they haven't said, they're happy to pay for news in some cases. Like we have an NPR station here, which, as you know, NPR lost, the public radio stations lost their federal funding. They just had a wildly successful fundraising effort to fill the gap left over by the Trump pulling that funding. So that's a sign. It may not be a huge sign, but it's a small sign that people are willing to help. But that's not a paywall. That's like donating to nonprofit news. So I think it's not about people don't want to pay for news so much, is they just want it to be easier to access. So give me a paywall-free nonprofit, but tell me where I can, send $60. I think is seeming to be kind of workable.
Well, let me ask this then, given everything you just said, because a decent number of our listeners are journalism students, and I gotta ask, I mean, gone are the days of like the marquee names with the huge salaries and all this stuff. Is this a sustainable career choice? And in the occasions when I've been asked to talk to journalism students, I now wonder, should I also be suggesting to have maybe some other career options on the back burner, because this is getting real rocky? And how do you build a life within a career that is so volatile?
And, I've thought about this a lot. I used to teach here in Chicago, teach journalism students. And I've thought about it a lot, whether I would recommend people go into journalism, study journalism, and what advice I would give them about having a life where you could pay your bills. And I think it's a tough call, because it's, some people are drawn to journalism because they love to tell stories and they're curious. That's why I got into it.
Same here.
I'm curious and I want to, get to the bottom of stuff. Other people don't go into it for that, and that's okay, I guess. But, is it a sustainable career? I don't know. I mean, I I mean, people are making a living at it, but like you said, the ones that are doing really well, they've got big teams and they've got some funding, and just starting out on your own and hoping you're going to, make some money from ads on TikTok. I don't know. And if you go to work for some local news organization, what kind of job security is there for you? It's a very tough call. That said, I think just the employment situation generally in the country is also tough,
That's
Mhm.
true.
tough for younger people, especially going into any career, right? There's no sure thing right now. I think things are a little bit shaky on a lot of fronts. But I mean, I hope young people still want to go to journalism. I hope lots of people from different parts of the country and the society will consider it as a career. I don't want it to just be, folks from wealthy families who are subsidized by their parents to have these low-paying jobs. I mean, we need a wide variety of people in the field. And I don't know. I'm a little worried about it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a thing that I also think about. Uh yeah, because it feels like I don't want to say the glory days are behind us, but this is going to be a lot more challenging, at least in the immediate future. So, considering that it used to be a really sweet gig to have, what was it that drew you to want to become a journalist?
Well, that's really interesting. I like did my first newspaper for the kids on my block when I was in fourth grade. So I've always obviously had some kind of curiosity about what was going on and wanting to share it with people. And I just went from there. I went to a really small school in Illinois that had a robust daily newspaper and got into it. And I moved over to television, which I, thought was an interesting way of mixing information with images. And I just, for me, it was always about the work. I mean, I can remember, not making any money at all for a long, 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 long time. It was a tough job back then too. And that wasn't why you got into journalism. And then something happened in the 80s when all of a sudden there was all this money and everybody was getting into it because you could make a lot of money. But there were always people like myself, I hope, who were interested in the basics. Tell the story, share the information, dig up what's going on, go to the city council meeting, get the weather forecast right, all that kind of stuff. And I have mixed feelings now about journalism. I still love it, but I worry about it all the time.
Well, Trevor, thank you so much. We're so happy to have you on the show, and thanks for this incredible conversation. Yes, thank you for joining Laid Off and Looking.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia.
Music provided by Jake Howitt. Research by Laura Rothenbucker.
You can watch and follow us on YouTube.
Or you can listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you have any questions or suggestions, we want to hear from you. So leave a comment.
We do check them.
Or reach out to us anytime at laidoffandlookingpod@gmail.com.
New episodes every Friday.